Hello explorers, thanks for joining us again and welcome back to our channel. In this episode, I will be diving into Africa's continental free trade ambition. Does the government of the continent of Africa need to be pushed, or this was just basically a political arrangement? We will be looking at this from a strategic point of view and where the continent of Africa stands as the year 2024 closes. I will be looking at the reason why trade can boost Africa's economic growth if cuts to tariffs, red tapes and corruptions are paired with investment in transportation. I will be looking at some specifics area in this particular video. I've been away for a while because I was going deeper into some particular research concerning this particular video. So I'm going to be diving into some strategic issues. So I'll encourage you to watch this video to the end for clarity and better understanding. Don't forget to drop your comment below and let me know where you stand in regards to the African Continental Free Trade Area. First, I will be looking at Africa's aspire to establish the world's largest free trade zone. And secondly, I will dive into the continent has enormous potential for economic growth, and I will close this episode as to the reason why the AfCFTA's future hangs on improving governance and logistics across the continent of Africa. I will close this episode as usual, giving you my own perspective on what I think. So without any much delay, let's just dive straight into it. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement, abbreviated as AfCFTA, represents an ambitious political vision and is arguably one of the most significant economic initiatives ever undertaken by the African Union. Encompassing 55 member states, the African Continental Free Trade aims to create the world's largest free trade area, facilitating intra-African continental commerce and also enhancing the continent's global economic position. However, its successful implementation is predicated on member states overcoming numerous obstacles beyond mere political differences, economic vested interest, and bureaucratic red tapes. Politically, goodwill also alone will not suffice to make Africa a united, affluent continent in the short to medium or future term, so to put it out. But let me just take a look first of all to understand how is the AfCFTA supposed to work in the continent of Africa. The project seeks to create a single market to boost intra-African trade and upgrade the continent's position globally. Objectives include establishing a liberalized market, facilitating investment and capital movement, laying the groundwork for a continental custom union, enhancing competitiveness, promoting industrial development and food security while expediting regional integration. The free trade zone boasts an cumulative gross domestic product of about $3.4 trillion and some 1.3 billion people across the continent. The AfCFTA officially entered into force on May 30, 2019 after sufficient ratifications were completed. Full implementation of the agreement, including reducing tariff and eliminating red tapes, will take years. When I was diving into this particular video, I also wanted to note that the first such obstacle is geographical barriers that complicate trade logistics and hinder the seamless movement of goods both across land borders and from inland to Atlantic and Indian Ocean ports. This is a very important thing as I was conducting my research with regards to this particular episode. First, let me look at the cost-effective water transport across Africa as it is totally limited. Africa is home to the largest number of landlocked countries in the world, and it has few navigable rivers connecting inland regions to the ocean. While the Nile, Congo, Niger, and also Zambezi rivers do provide some connectivity, they are often unsuitable for year-round navigation or only partially navigable. Consequently, transporting goods by river barges to seaports is frequently impractical. Barges are generally a more cost-effective mode of transportation than trains. So African inland goods face an effective geographical tax on transportation. This situation places manufacturers in industrialized countries at a significant cost advantage in global market. Improving the investing in navigable systems could greatly boost the competitiveness of African enterprises. This is a very important thing. While biggest African rivers offer some navigability for transportation of goods, their effectiveness varies significantly due to gaps in infrastructure and seasonal conditions. Improving and investing in navigable systems, like I pointed out, could greatly enhance the river's role in regional trade and also transportation, and in turn boost the competitiveness of African enterprises. Like I said, if you look at the diagram, clearly explains based on my own research. For example, the Chongqing-Guangyang port in central north part of China provides a good example of the importance of investment into navigable waterways. The multi-modal inland hub significantly helps China's foreign trade despite being approximately 1,000 kilometers from the sea. Goods are efficiently transported by floating containers down the Yangtze River all the way to the South China Sea, where the goods then move to trains and ships, showcasing how effective waterway systems can facilitate trade from inland locations. Another very important thing while I was doing my research, the insufficient rail networks across the continent of Africa. Although rail is the next cheapest mode for transportation goods, most African cargo is still transported or poorly maintained roads due to inadequate rail networks. With the exception of Chinese-built transcontinental railway, most African railway lines are designated or designed for specific projects, such as connecting mines to port, rather than as part of a cohesive national or continental infrastructural plan. This result is limiting rail cargo capacity. It is important for the continent of Africa to understand this. Cross-border road transport in Africa is not only inherently more expensive than river transportation, but also susceptible to border delays and briberies. Let me be clear. In this context, the construction of the United States funded 560 kilometers long Lobito Corridor Railway, which runs from Southern Democratic Republic of the Congo, that's the DRC, through to Zambia, to the port of Lobito in Angola, is particularly significant. It will connect inland copper producers to the Atlantic, reducing transport costs to Western markets and facilitating rail to cargo for producers in Central and Southern African countries. However, access to the Lobito Corridor will still rely on the feeder road rather than the direct rail connections. It is important. When I looked at the intra-African trade, it's a clear indication where there are challenges regards the AfCFTA. The 2024 trade report by the African Export-Import Bank, known as also AfriEximbank, highlighted that intra-African trade grew by 3.2% in 2023, reaching that's looking about over $192 billion, a total of 14.9% of all African trade. That is a slowdown from 10.4% growth in 2022, and it remains modest compared to the intra-continental dynamic in regions like Asia and also in Europe. South Africa leads with a 21.4% share of intra-African trade, while Southern African regions accounts for 41% of the total trade. This is a very important concern for the continent of Africa. The report also identifies the Democratic Republic of the Congo as a key player in enhancing intra-African trade. Its copper export boosts Zambia's commerce, while South Africa stands out as the main supplier of mining machinery and pharmaceutical to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In exchange, the DRC export inorganic chemicals, precious metals, copper, and also vehicles part to South Africa. It is important for us to also note that there are other obstacles as the AfCFTA institutionalized solutions are actually needed. Cross-border road transportation in Africa is not only inherently more expensive than river transport, but also susceptible to border delays and bribery, effectively creating an unofficial toll on transported goods, like I pointed out. It is important to note that transportation poses a greater challenge for African trade than tariffs and duties, with other taxes also creating significant obstacles. Outside of South Africa and Egypt, numerous African countries rely heavily on border tax for fiscal revenue. For example, in Uganda, border tax accounts for approximately 25% of the government's revenue, while in South Africa, this figure is only 3.5%. To assist vulnerable states in transitioning to lower border tax under AfCFTA, the adjustment fund has also been established. Nevertheless, concerns about corruption remains extremely high with regards to this particular area. International development financing institutions are addressing Africa's trade finance gap by increasing lending and offering alternative financial products. AfriEximbank plans to double its funding for intra-African trade to $40 billion by 2026 based on figure, which will support adjustment funds. Additionally, the Transaction Guarantees Instrument facilitating transactions in groups and sub-regions that typically face higher rejection rates. The Pan-African Payment and Settlement System provides a centralized platform for intra-African trade payments, but requires improvement on digital network across the continent. Furthermore, the base fund of the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund is designed to support countries and businesses' activities within the AfCFTA trading framework. These are some very huge concerns that the continent of Africa should face. While rail and digital infrastructures are constant or cornerstones of competitivizations, are also anti-corruption is essential for ensuring safety and also security. This development highlights a growing focus on institutionalized development in Africa, largely driven by the AfCFTA. The significance of the institutions was underscored by the 2024 Nobel Prize winners in economics, Daron Acemoglu, Simon Johnson, and Os James Robinson, who emphasized that societal institutions are crucial for a country's prosperity. Societies with weak rule of law and exploitative institutions fail to generate growth or positive change. The African Continental Free Trade Area also facilitates difficult discussions about trade. For example, while Moroccan and South African businesses are eager to engage in commerce and companies want to get onto with trade, South Africa's government anti-Moroccan stand often hinders those efforts. While rail and digital infrastructures are cornerstones of competitiveness, like I've pointed out, anti-corruption is essential for ensuring safety and also security. This makes institutions like the Commonwealth African Anti-Corruption Center vital for success of the AfCFTA. A recent presentation to Business Unit South Africa has also highlighted key improvements needed to make Africa more competitive, regularly reform human capital and also development, infrastructure enhanced safety, and also security measures. Our educational advancement are important. The biggest advantage of the African Continental Free Trade Area is that it shines a light on the most formidable hurdles for African trade and competitiveness. Its real benefit lies in addressing those problems rather than merely reducing duties. As the AfCFTA Secretary General Wenkele Mene explained, we are on the right track, but the track is very, very long. We are now focusing on competitiveness at last. Thanks to AfCFTA, he pointed out. Smaller economies rely more on trade, so having a bigger market is a net good for everybody. This is what will happen based on my own scenario if I compare the two analyses and look at where Africa sits on this particular trade arrangement. First, the likely scenario from my own perspective, the African Continental Free Trade Area works in the long term for some. Smaller African nations are increasingly positioning themselves for increased trade by implementing regulatory reforms, investing in education, and enhancing both rail and also digital infrastructure. They are also strengthening institutions to combat corruption, improve safety and security while protecting property and intellectual rights. A prime example of such a country is Ivory Coast, which has emerged as a trade hub in West Africa by importing crude oil from Nigeria, refining it, and then exporting the refined products to neighboring countries like Burkina Faso, Ghana, and Mali. Its top trading partners. The success of trade champions such as Ivory Coast is expected to catalyze a broader shift towards trade-driven growth in the region for over the next 50 years. Another scenario that I see, which is unlikely, the Africa's quick economic miracle through trade. Free trade is enthusiastically embraced by all African countries seeking to maximize the AfCFTA benefits. Governments roll up their sleeves to enhance economic competitiveness through essential reforms, institutional changes, and well-targeted infrastructural development. The mercantile flywheels, a concept where increased trade leads to economic growth, gradually delivers on the promised gains. However, even in the most optimistic scenario, such valiant efforts face challenges and may not be sufficient to propel the continent of Africa into a sustainable high growth over the next 15 years as envisaged based on analyst report. We want to thank you for watching. Hopefully I've informed you regards to the hurdles that are ahead and the challenges that the continent of Africa face looking at the Africa's continental free trade area, the ambition and where the governments of Africa sit, and where infrastructure, in particularly the road networks including rails and more importantly the waterways, needs to be invested and developed to make sure that the AfCFTA become a reality. I want to thank you for watching. Leave us a comment, let us know where you stand regards to the current situation in the region, and I would like to know if your country has experienced some benefits and also is planning to make sure that they implement this particular phase of the trade. We are looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.